Parents gave my brother our family business and called me a failure. So I cut contact 2 years later. You're the failure. You're just a burden we won't carry anymore. Get out! My mother said those words. Her voice was cold. It cut right through me. I was standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen I had scrubbed for years, the same place I cooked family dinners. My father was there too. He didn't say anything. He didn't defend me. He just slid the house keys across the table. They weren't for me. They were for my brother. They gave him everything. The family business. It was a small landscaping company. My grandfather started it. My brother got it all. He also got the second house, the one my grandfather built with his own hands. And their approval? That was like a shiny ribbon on top of all the gifts. Me? I got silence. And a plastic bag. It held leftovers from dinner, a dinner I cooked. That night I walked out. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just left. My name is Isabella, and I was 28 years old. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? The first week was a blur, a haze of cheap motel rooms, a different one every night. I paid cash. I didn't want a paper trail. I didn't want them to find me. Not that they were looking hard. They just wanted me gone. They got what they wanted. I felt hollow, like a shell. My own skin felt too big for me. I couldn't eat the leftovers my mother had bagged. The irony was too much. A final gift of unwanted scraps. I threw the bag away at the first gas station. It felt like throwing away the last piece of the old Isabella, the one who still hoped I had maybe $700 in my checking account, my emergency fund. It felt like a mountain of money one day and dust the next. I had to start immediately. I couldn't wait. Fear was a cold thing, but it was also a great motivator. It kicked me out of bed every morning. I moved 30 miles away, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone familiar, close enough that I could still work. I found a tiny apartment. It was just one room, a studio. The carpet smelled like old cigarettes and disappointment. It was on the 3rd floor. No elevator. The rent was cheap. I took it immediately. No references. I paid the first month and deposit in cash. It was dirty, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave this time. The bed folded into the wall. I slept on the couch the first few nights, too tired to figure out the latch. I didn't care. I just needed to be alone. I needed the silence. The silence felt safe. It was better than the noise of their disapproval. I started applying for every job I saw. Waitress, cashier, anything. I landed too quickly. The first was at a place called the Corner Diner. I worked the breakfast and lunch shift. 6 days a week. It was fast. It was loud. The coffee was weak. The customers were demanding, but the money was steady. Real money. Earned by my own hands. Not money filtered through my father's business. The second job was cleaning offices. I worked from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., 4 nights a week. It was lonely work. Empty desks. Dead computers. I was just a shadow moving through the dark buildings, cleaning up other people's mess. It felt symbolic. Cleaning up the mess they made of my life. I was exhausted, bone-tired. Every muscle ached. I learned to sleep for 4 hours, wake up, shower, go to the diner, come back, nap for 2 hours, and then go clean. It was a brutal schedule. My body protested. My feet ached constantly. I bought cheap shoes with extra padding. They helped a little, but the exhaustion was a gift, too. It kept my mind from wandering. When I was scrubbing a tile floor, I couldn't think about my mother's cold eyes. When I was balancing 3 plates of pancakes, I couldn't dwell on the keys sliding toward Michael. The constant physical labor replaced the emotional pain with a physical one. A manageable pain. A pain I could control. I started the Freedom Fund. It wasn't a bank account. Not yet. It was a notebook. A cheap spiral-bound one. On the first page, I wrote the amount I needed for a down payment on land. A massive, impossible number. Underneath, I wrote the number of hours I needed to work to get there. It looked like years, decades, but seeing it written down made it real. It gave the pain a purpose. I tracked every dollar, every tip, every paycheck. The diner tips went into a jar under my bed. The cleaning money went directly into the bank. I was obsessive. I stopped buying things. No new clothes. No dinners out. My diet consisted of canned beans, toast, and the occasional free coffee from the diner. The loneliness was a constant companion. It sat on the edge of the bed when I was trying to sleep. It followed me on the bus ride between jobs. I had no friends here. I didn't try to make any. I didn't want to explain myself, where I came from, why I was here. It was easier to be invisible. My birthday came and went. The first one without them. I was turning 29. I spent the day working the diner and then cleaning an insurance office. When I got home at 1:30 a.m., I sat on my fold-out couch. I had bought a small cupcake, a single one. With one candle, I lit it. I sang myself happy birthday in a whisper. The silence afterward was deafening. I didn't make a wish. I had only one wish: to be free. Truly free. I checked my phone once. No calls, no texts, not even a generic Facebook post. It hurt. It was supposed to hurt. It was a validation. They didn't care. Not enough to break their silence. They had washed their hands of me. That realization, cold and hard, was another brick in my foundation. Then, the voicemails started. The guilt-laced voicemails. They weren't frequent. Maybe one every 3 months. Always from my mother. I never answered the call. I just listened to the transcripts on my voicemail app. First one, 3 months in. Isabella, we really are worried. We haven't heard from you. I hope you're doing okay. Things here are a mess with Michael in the business. Please just call your father. He's upset. It would be easier if you just called. Easier for them. Never easier for me. Second one, 6 months in. It's Thanksgiving, Isabella. We set a plate for you. The house feels empty. You know how much I hate holidays without the family complete. We just want to know you're safe. Call us. We forgive you. Forgive me? Forgive me for leaving after they told me to get out? The arrogance made my stomach clench. I deleted the message immediately. Third one, almost a year in. Michael is struggling, Isabella. The new tractor broke down. The accounts are all over the place. Honestly, you were always better at the books than he was. Could you just call and maybe give him some advice? We're a family after all. The hook. The manipulation. Trying to pull me back using Michael's failure. Using my competence against me. They weren't calling because they loved me. They were calling because they needed my labor. I never responded. I used the voicemails as fuel. I took on an extra cleaning shift at a warehouse. More hours, more money, more distance. I started sketching in the Freedom Fund notebook. Little drawings of my dream. Not just money goals, but blueprints. A small house, lots of glass, a space for a garden. I had always loved gardening. My grandfather had tried to teach me about soil and planting when I was a kid. He was the one who built the second house, the one Michael got. That memory stung. I didn't draw grand mansions. I drew simple, functional spaces, a small kitchen, a big porch, a place where the sun would pour in, where I could feel warm, safe. I spent hours tracing the lines, imagining the layout. Each line drawn was a future they couldn't touch. I celebrated the next Christmas alone, too. I wrapped myself in a blanket. I watched old black and white movies on my tiny laptop. I made a mug of hot cocoa. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I missed the noise sometimes, the familiarity, but I didn't miss the tension, the feeling of being scrutinized, the sharp silence whenever my brother was praised. I realized my whole life with them was about walking on eggshells, trying to be good enough, trying to be useful enough, trying to earn the love they gave freely to Michael. Now there were no eggshells. I was walking on solid ground. My ground. The 2 years passed in a rhythm of work, sleep, and saving. I became strong, physically, emotionally. My hands got calloused. My mind got sharp. I learned how to say no. I learned how to stand up for myself, even if it was just to a rude customer at the diner. I learned my value. My value wasn't tied to their approval. It was tied to my labor, my effort, my existence. The Freedom Fund grew, slowly, steadily. I saw the number climb higher and higher. Each deposit was a defeat for their narrative. Each dollar was a silent scream of, I am not a burden. I looked at my apartment sometimes, at the peeling wallpaper, at the noisy radiator. I was grateful for it. It was my lifeboat, but I knew it was temporary. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing to live. I was laying the foundation for a real life, a strong life, rooted in myself. The desire to build something tangible became an obsession, a positive one. I didn't want the instability of renting. I wanted land. I wanted something they could never take away, something that was indisputably mine. I started researching property law, zoning, land prices. It felt like learning a new language, a language of ownership, a language of power. I learned that there were small, unwanted plots of land outside the main towns, land that needed work, land that was cheap. The idea crystallized. I would buy a piece of dirt, the most unloved, unglamorous dirt I could find, and I would transform it. I would prove that value doesn't come pre-packaged. It's created. It's earned, just like my freedom. The second anniversary of me leaving came and went. I celebrated by taking a full day off work. I went to the beach. I sat on the sand. I watched the ocean. I let the vastness of the water wash over me. It felt cleansing. 2 years. They were in the past. I was moving forward. I looked at the number in my Freedom Fund notebook. It was close. So close. I just needed one more push. One more sacrifice. I signed up for an extra graveyard shift. More hours cleaning the warehouse. More cold nights alone. But the cold didn't bother me anymore. I was warm inside. Warm with purpose. Warm with the fierce, quiet determination of a woman who was done being called a failure. I was ready. Ready to stop just saving. Ready to start building. Ready to claim my space in the world. Ready to plant my roots deep. The silence of the last 2 years had been my education. It had taught me everything I needed to know about myself, and everything I needed to forget about them. I was close to my goal. The numbers in my Freedom Fund notebook were finally adding up. I felt a nervous kind of excitement. It was time to stop sketching dreams and start buying dirt. I spent weeks looking. Online listings, driving out to rural areas, talking to real estate agents who looked at me funny. A single woman with dirty work boots asking about fixer-upper land. Land no one wanted. Most of the available plots were too expensive or too far away. I needed to stay within an hour of my cleaning jobs. I still needed that income. Then I found it. It was about 40 miles outside the city. A small 5-acre plot. It was oddly shaped, long and narrow, bordered by a creek on one side and an old logging road on the other. It had been listed for years. No one bought it. I drove out on a Sunday, my one day off. I parked my old used car by the road. I stepped out. The air smelled different here, cleaner, earthy. The land was a mess, overgrown, wild, thick with weeds and scrub brush. There were old tires half buried in the soil. Junk metal rusted near the creek. People had treated it like a dumping ground. I started walking. I walked the entire perimeter, my boots crunching on the dry weeds. I felt the solitude immediately. Total, absolute quiet. No city noise, no diner sounds, just the wind in the few sickly-looking pine trees. I saw what others missed. I saw the sun path, how the light moved across the land. I saw the creek, even though it was choked with debris. It was water. I saw the slight slope. Good for drainage. Perfect for a garden. Where people saw junk and failure, I saw possibility. This land was just like me. Unwanted. Dismissed. Waiting for someone to see its potential. I pulled out my phone and called the agent. I didn't let myself hesitate. This was the one. The price was low. Shockingly low. Just within reach of my total savings. I made an offer immediately. The agent sounded surprised. He tried to warn me. It's rough land, Miss Isabella. No utilities, no well. You'll be starting from scratch. That's exactly what I want, I told him. Starting from scratch. That was the point of my whole life now. The next 6 weeks were intense. Paperwork, lawyers, signatures. My heart hammered every time I wrote a check. Every single penny of the Freedom Fund was gone. My bank account was almost empty. It was scary. Terrifying, really, but when the papers were finally signed, when my name was on the deed, I felt a deep, overwhelming wave of emotion. I drove straight to the land that afternoon. I stood in the middle of the weeds. I reached down and grabbed a handful of the dirt. It was coarse, dark. It felt real. It's mine, I whispered. My voice broke. I didn't cry then. I didn't let myself, but I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The weight of being homeless. The weight of being dependent. The weight of being a burden. It was all gone, replaced by the weight of responsibility. A much better weight, a weight I could handle. The first few months were just about clearing. It was brutal work. I kept my jobs in the city. I drove out to the land every morning right after my diner shift. I worked until dark. Then I drove back to the city for the cleaning shift. I slept 2 hours a night, maybe 3. I bought a used pickup truck, an old beat-up thing. It rattled, but it worked. I hauled away trash, old refrigerators, rusty metal. Mountains of overgrown brush. I rented a chipper. I learned how to use a chainsaw safely, carefully. My hands were a mess, cut, blistered, tanned dark from the sun. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. I ate sandwiches in the truck, drank water from a cooler. I wore the same clothes every day. I didn't care. I hired a professional surveyor. I needed to know the exact boundaries. When the stakes were hammered into the ground, marking the corners, it was another moment of triumph. My lines, undeniable. I started the garden area first. I chose a spot high on the slope where the sun hit best. I dug and dug and dug, turning the soil, removing rocks. It was slow. It was monotonous, but it was therapeutic. Every rock I pulled out felt like an old memory I was tossing aside. Every shovelful of soil was building something new. I decided on lavender. It was a tough plant, resilient. It smelled beautiful. It was a plant that demanded respect. It didn't need coddling, just sunlight and space. I felt a connection to it. I ordered 1,000 small lavender saplings. It was a huge expense, but I used my knowledge from the diner tips to pay for them. I planned the rows, carefully, precisely. Planting them took days. I worked on my knees, pressing the delicate roots into the rough soil. It was a moment of vulnerability. I was putting my hope, my money, my future into this dirt. What if it failed? What if nothing grew? I pushed the doubt away. Watered by rejection, I reminded myself. That was my mantra. I would not let this fail. I needed a place to live. The apartment in the city was a waste of money now. I had to quit the cleaning job. I couldn't keep the pace. I kept the diner job for income, but I focused my energy on the land. I bought a small, sturdy construction trailer. A used one. It was ugly. It was cramped, but it was cheap. And I parked it on the cleared part of my land. It had a tiny stove and a cot. It was rough, but I was finally sleeping on my own property. No more rent. No more landlords. The process of building the house began. I knew I couldn't do the heavy lifting alone. I hired a local contractor, an old man named Walter. He was quiet. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just looked at my messy blueprints and nodded. "You know what you want, girl," he said. That was the only praise I needed. Walter and his small crew did the foundation. The cement. The framing. It was incredible to watch. The skeleton of my dream house rising out of the dirt. I paid Walter in installments. Every single paycheck from the diner went to him. It was a partnership. He built the bones. I would build the skin and the heart. I took over the moment the framing was up. I had saved enough for the roofing materials. I watched videos. I read manuals. I learned how to shingle. It was terrifying climbing up the steep roof, but I didn't fall. I measured twice. I cut once. I worked slowly, methodically. My first big achievement was the windows. I found discounted, energy-efficient glass panels. They were huge, floor-to-ceiling windows on the south side. I wanted light. So much light. I wanted to see the garden from everywhere. I wanted no secrets. No dark corners. Putting those windows in was a fight. They were heavy. I needed help from Walter's son, a young man named Jake, to lift them into the frames. When the last window was sealed, and I could stand inside the house, looking out at my lavender rose, it felt like I had conquered a mountain. The house was open, airy, modern, but rustic. Stone and wood. It was exactly what I had sketched in my notebook during those lonely nights. It was the anti-house. The opposite of the heavy, dark, guilt-ridden house my parents lived in. I learned to run electrical wire. I learned to hang drywall. My father, with his landscaping business, always talked about being hands-on, but he never taught me any of this. He taught Michael how to run the numbers. I learned how to build a life. A real, solid, three-dimensional life. Every nail I hammered was a quiet protest. Every coat of paint was a balm on an old wound. This wasn't just a house. It was therapy. It was a declaration of independence. I worked on the solar panels myself. I bought the kit online. I followed the instructions meticulously. When I flipped the main switch and the house lights came on, powered by the sun over my own land, I cried. Not sad tears. Tears of exhausted joy. I was self-sufficient. I was living off my own earnings, my own labor, my own land. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their keys. I needed nothing from them. I planted the garden around the house. Rosemary near the porch. Thyme near the kitchen. A few small fruit trees. My place was taking shape. It was becoming a home. A place of deep, quiet peace. I often stood outside at sunset, looking at the finished structure, the stone facade, the cedar porch, the neat rows of lavender already growing strong and green, the sun setting behind the trees on my own property. I had done it. I had proven them wrong. Not to them, but to myself. I wasn't a failure. I was a builder, a survivor, a creator. The house was quiet, but it was a warm quiet, a comforting quiet. Not the suffocating silence I grew up with. This silence was full of potential, full of life. My life, I framed the deed to the land. I hung it on my bedroom wall, a reminder of the price of freedom and the power of starting over. I was finally rooted, and the roots were mine alone, strong, deep, unshakable. The 2 years of silence and saving had led to this. My piece of dirt, my house, my claim on the world. It was a humble start, but it was a solid one. I was no longer running. I was standing firm, on my own land, waiting for the world to catch up. And I knew deep down that soon they would. Life settled into a rhythm, a good rhythm. I worked a few days a week at the diner, just enough to keep cash flowing. The rest of the time I was on my land. I was busy. I was focused. The house was mostly finished inside. The scent of fresh wood and lavender filled the air. I was happy, a quiet, deep-seated happy, the kind that comes from knowing you built your own safety net. I thought less and less about my old life. The memory of my mother's cold voice still felt sharp sometimes, but it was distant, like a sound heard across a wide field. Then the phone rang. I was in my greenhouse potting small lavender cuttings. The air was humid and warm. My phone was on a nearby bench. It buzzed and vibrated against the wood. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I usually let those go, but this time something made me stop. A shift in the air. A feeling. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up. Hello? My voice was calm, steady, a man's voice answered. It was rushed, panicked. It was ragged around the edges, like it hadn't been used for something honest in a long time. Isabella? I recognized it immediately. Michael, my brother. My stomach tightened, a hard knot of old pain and new defense. 2 years of silence. Broken now by this rushed sound, I didn't say anything. I just held the phone. I waited. Let him speak first. Let him fill the silence that I had worked so hard to create. Isabella, it's Michael. Look, I know it's been a while. A long while. But listen, Dad. Dad's really worked up. He drove out there. My heart rate jumped. I gripped the phone harder. So the drive-by had happened. I knew it. My father was a coward, but he was also controlling. He couldn't stand not knowing what I was doing. He drove past your place. He saw it. Michael rushed on. He sounded like he was talking to a wall, not to a person. He wasn't connecting with me. He was reporting. He came back and just stared at the walls for an hour. Said he couldn't believe it. Said you had done something. I closed my eyes. Done something. As if creating a life from nothing was an event, not an existence. As if it was a trick, not hard work. Michael's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper, but still frantic. You need to see this place. She built a whole life without us. A house. A real house. I told him. I tried to tell him you were fine on your own, but Dad saw it, and now Mom is losing it. His language struck me. You need to see this place. He wasn't talking to me. He was reciting what he heard. He was sharing his father's shock. He was acting as their messenger. He was not checking on me. He was checking on my project. I opened my eyes and looked around my small greenhouse, at the neat rows of green, at the sunlight pouring through the glass. This was my world. He had no right to disturb it. He had forfeited that right 2 years ago. Michael, I said. My voice was low, calmer than his. Why are you calling me? The directness stopped him. There was a pause, a thick, awkward pause. He clearly hadn't prepared for a question. He had prepared for me to listen to their drama. Why? Isabella, come on. We're family. Dad's having a crisis. The business. Things aren't good. They're terrible, actually. And you just suddenly have this whole life out of nowhere. It's upsetting them. They're confused. They feel like you should have kept in contact. I let out a slow, quiet breath. They're confused. It's upsetting them. Not we miss you or I'm sorry. It was all about their feelings, their inconvenience, their shock that the failure didn't crumble exactly where they dropped her. You said I was a burden, Michael. I stated. Simple, direct, no emotion in the words. Just fact. You heard Mom say, get out. You took the keys. You got the business. You got their approval. I got silence. And a plastic bag of leftovers, he stammered. That was Dad and Mom, not me. I was just doing what they told me. I didn't mean for you to be gone this long. Look, they're upset now because they realized how good the business was. And you were so good at organizing things, Bella. I need your help. Just a little advice. There it was. The real reason, not guilt, not family love, not even concern for my well-being. It was about their need, their crumbling legacy, my organizational skills, the very skills they dismissed as being too fussy or too meticulous when I was helping them. They only wanted me back when they realized my skills were worth more than his blind ambition. The thought made me feel cold, a deep, heavy cold. They hadn't changed. Not at all. They still saw me as a utility, a resource to be tapped when they ran dry. No, Michael, I said, still quiet, still steady. No what? He demanded, his voice rising in frustration, the old familiar bullying tone. No advice, no help, no conversation about the business. But Isabella, it's the family legacy, Grandpa's company. It's collapsing. You can't just stand by. Doesn't that matter to you? It stopped mattering 2 years ago when you took the keys and they called me a failure, I said. I felt the finality of the word settle on me. It felt clean, pure. The only thing that matters to me now is this life, this house, this silence. You don't get to come back and disrupt that just because your inheritance is hard work. I heard him sigh heavily, a dramatic self-pitying sound. You're being so cruel, Isabella. After everything Mom and Dad did for you, I almost laughed. A dry, humorless sound. What did they do, Michael? They gave you the security. They gave me the strength. I built this place from the strength they forced me to find. That's the only thing they gave me that helped. I was done with the conversation. It was going nowhere. He was a messenger of guilt and need, not a brother seeking reconciliation. Don't call me again, Michael, I told him. This number is for my life now. It's not for your crisis. I hung up. Without waiting for a reply, I placed the phone back on the bench. My hands were shaking slightly. I sat down hard on the wooden floor of the greenhouse. The scent of lavender was powerful. I took deep breaths, in and out, slowing my heartbeat. Calming the old panic the sound of his voice had triggered. The shock on his part was palpable. The sheer disbelief that I, the discarded one, had not only survived but was thriving enough to warrant a drive-by from my father. That was the core of it. My sudden visibility was their sudden pain. My independence was their lack of control. I knew what would happen next. Curiosity always follows cruelty. They had confirmed my existence. Now they needed to explain it. They needed to minimize it. They needed to find a way to integrate my success into their narrative. A narrative where they were the good parents, and I was the strong, independent daughter who simply chose to leave. They would never admit they pushed me out. I went back to potting the lavender. My movements were more deliberate now, more careful. The conversation had cracked open the seal I had placed on the past, but it hadn't broken me. It had fortified me. My brother's call was a confirmation, a validation of my choice. He hadn't called out of love. He had called out of panic and self-interest. He had called because my quiet life had suddenly become louder than their failing business. I looked at the house through the glass. Solid, real, built with 2 years of silent determination. I didn't reply to my brother. I didn't send a text. I knew my actions were enough. My continued silence was the loudest answer I could give. I was not coming back to save their legacy. I was too busy living my own. I knew they would come. Michael's phone call was the starter pistol. My refusal to help him meant they had to see it for themselves. They had to confirm that the person they called a burden was truly living a life they couldn't control. Curiosity was a sickness in my family. It always followed cruelty. 2 days after the call, I was ready. I felt a strange calm. I was out front near the stone gate I had built myself. It wasn't a fancy gate, just 2 simple columns of mortared fieldstone. It marked my boundary. It was my line in the dirt. I was watering the young saplings I'd planted along the driveway. They were small oak trees, strong, slow-growing trees, a symbol of permanence. I wore my usual work clothes, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and my heavy boots. My hands were calloused and brown from the sun. I was holding a metal watering can. I looked like a farmer, a quiet, grounded person. Not the frantic, approval-seeking daughter they remembered. The sun was high. It was a beautiful, normal afternoon. Then I saw it. The dark blue sedan, my father's car. It was old, heavy, unmistakable. It always seemed to announce its presence. It didn't just drive past. It slowed down, dramatically. The brake lights flashed. The speed dropped to a crawl, slower than any car should move on that road. It was deliberate. A slow-motion invasion. I felt the sudden rush of old adrenaline. That quick, sharp fear I used to feel whenever he entered a room. But this time it was different. It didn't paralyze me. It solidified me. I didn't drop the watering can. I didn't run inside. I stayed right where I was. On my land, I watched the car approach. My grip on the watering can was steady. I didn't wave. I didn't look angry. I didn't look welcoming. I just existed. I stood firm. The car crept alongside my stone gate. My father was driving. He was alone. I could see his profile. His face was rigid, stiff. He looked older than I remembered. His hair seemed grayer. His eyes were fixed on the house. They scanned it slowly. From the ground up, he looked at the roof, the solar panels shining in the sun. He looked at the neatly tended rows of lavender I had planted. He looked at the porch lanterns I'd hung. He looked at the clean lines of the stone siding. He was searching for a flaw, searching for proof that I hadn't done this myself, that someone else had paid, someone else had built it. He needed a loophole. He needed a way to slot this massive achievement into his existing belief system, that I was incompetent, that I was a failure. But the house defied his narrative. It was solid. It was real. It was undeniably mine. His eyes lingered on the glass entryway, the openness of the house. He saw that the interior was bright, full of light, a completely different world from the dim, heavy atmosphere of the house he still lived in. Then, his eyes finally found me. I stood there, calm. I let him look. I didn't flinch. I let him see my quiet strength, the work-worn quality of my hands, the peace in my expression. There was no victory in my look, no malice, only a profound, heavy indifference. I was simply watering my trees. I was minding my own business, the business they said I couldn't manage. In his eyes, I saw several things flash, one after the other. First, shock, complete stunned disbelief that I had acquired this. Second, calculation, trying to figure out the cost, trying to figure out the logistics. trying to figure out how I pulled it off without asking them for help. Third, a flicker of something painful, regret. Not regret for what he did to me, but regret for what he lost. The loss of control, the loss of his claim on my life. He didn't slow the car to a stop. He didn't roll down the window. He didn't make a gesture. He couldn't. To stop would be to admit defeat. To speak would be to break the 2-year silence on my terms, not his. He just stared. For a long, silent moment. The car was moving maybe 5 miles an hour. It felt like 10 minutes. Then his foot pressed the gas. Slowly. The car picked up speed. He drove past the gate. Down the road. He didn't look back. I stayed put. I finished watering the sapling. My breath was steady. I didn't feel rage. I felt a quiet, settled power. It was over. The first encounter. And I had won. Not by fighting, but by standing still. By simply existing in the reality I had created. I knew that seeing it was enough to shake him. It wasn't just a house to him. It was a tangible object that proved my mother's words wrong. The burden had built a structure strong enough to withstand the very storm they had sent her into. I went inside the house. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, fresh from my garden. I sat on the porch, looking out at the road where his car had been. His visit confirmed everything Michael said. They were panicked. They were curious. They were now facing the consequences of their actions. I was gone, and I was thriving. Their fear was that I was doing better than Michael, the favored son, and the proof was sitting right here. Solar-powered, lavender-scented, built with my own hands. The drive-by wasn't about reconnection. It was about verification. They needed to see the scale of the disaster they created by pushing me away. They needed to gauge the threat of my new independence. I didn't dwell on it. I let the feelings settle. The relief that it was over. The strength of knowing I held all the cards now. They were observers. I was the architect. I realized that the drive-by, the silent watching, was the closest thing to an apology I would get from him right now. He couldn't say the words, but the act of driving 40 miles, slowing down, and staring, that was his acknowledgement. His admission of surprise, and perhaps a small, tiny sliver of respect. But respect wasn't love. Acknowledgement wasn't acceptance. I reminded myself of the keys, the words, the 2 years of silence. This house wasn't built for his approval. It was built for my survival. I smiled a small, tired smile. I finished my tea. The incident was closed. I went back to work. I had the interior painting left to do. The silence of my home welcomed me back. It was the only voice I needed to hear. The drive-by was over. My father had verified my existence. He had seen the proof of my survival. That silent observation was quickly followed by the next stage of their tactic, the attempt to rewrite history. It happened that same evening. I was winding down. I had just finished the last coat of trim paint in the main room. I was tired but satisfied. I sat down with my laptop, not to work, but to look at garden layouts. My inbox pinged. A notification sound I still tried to ignore, but this time I knew. I felt it in my gut. This wasn't a bank notification. This was them. I opened my email. The sender was my mother, Mom. The subject line was casual, too casual, like we'd just missed a lunch date. Subject, we should talk. I stared at the screen. The letters seemed to jump out at me. We should talk. 2 years of absolute willful silence. 2 years of my struggling alone. Now suddenly we should talk. Because I built a house they couldn't ignore. I opened the email. I read it once, then a second time, slowly, letting the words burn into my memory. Isabella, we didn't mean for things to get so distant. It was never our intention. Your brother really needed help with the business, and you always seemed so independent, so capable on your own. We thought you were fine. Things have been tough here lately, with Michael. And the business. We've been worried. We miss you. We should reconnect. Maybe we can come see the house sometime. We hear it's quite beautiful. Love, Mom. I put the laptop down on the table. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. I needed a glass of water. My mouth felt dry. The words were simple. The deceit was immense. The first line, we didn't mean for things to get so distant. A complete denial of their action. They didn't mean for things to get distant. They told me I was a failure. They told me to get out. They gave my inheritance to my brother. That wasn't an accident. That was a clear, calculated message. This was the first lie. The biggest one. Blurring the lines so they could step back across them without apologizing. The next part was the classic defense. Your brother really needed help with the business, and you always seemed so independent, so capable on your own. We thought you were fine. This was a punch to the gut. They were using my strength against me. My independence wasn't a natural state. It was a forced survival mechanism. They saw my ability to stand alone and used it as an excuse to discard me. Because I didn't cry or beg, they assumed I was fine. They didn't have to worry about me. All the emotional effort went to Michael, the needy one, the favored one. My resilience was their convenience. My capability was my sentence of exile. Then came the pity plea. Things have been tough here lately, with Michael. And the business. We've been worried. They were worried about themselves. About their investment in Michael. They weren't worried about the failure daughter they threw out. They were laying the groundwork for the inevitable request for help, which Michael had already foreshadowed. It was emotional blackmail wrapped in a passive-aggressive update. And finally, the pivot. We miss you. We should reconnect. Maybe we can come see the house sometime. We hear it's quite beautiful. This was the real purpose of the email. They missed the idea of me, the compliant daughter. They missed the feeling of a complete family. But more than that, they were obsessed with my house. They were seeking access. They wanted to witness the quite beautiful thing I built so they could finally fit it into their understanding. They wanted to touch it, see it, and perhaps eventually find a way to claim credit for the inspiration. There was no apology. No, we are sorry we called you a failure. No, we regret our choice to give Michael everything. No ownership, just a casual revision of the past. A casual attempt to re-enter my life now that my life was successful. I sat back down. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear. From a deep, righteous indignation. They thought I was stupid. They thought I would fall for this transparent attempt at emotional damage control. I closed my eyes. I pictured the moment 2 years ago. The kitchen table. The keys sliding toward Michael. My mother's cold eyes. I held on to that memory. That pain was my shield. It was the truth. This email was a lie. I considered what to do. Reply with anger? Explain the truth? List every betrayal? No, that's what they wanted. They wanted drama. They wanted a conversation they could control. They wanted me to expose my pain so they could minimize it. They wanted my energy. I would not give them my energy. I opened a new email window. I didn't send it to her. I sent it to myself. I copied the entire text of my mother's email. I pasted it into the body of my self-email. Then I wrote the subject line. I made it clear, concise, a final word on their deception, spoken only for me. Subject, when they pretend they didn't push you out. I hit send. Then I closed the self-email. I went back to the original email from my mother. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it. I left it there, unread, marked only by my forward to myself. It was a digital artifact of their failure to apologize. I took the laptop and carried it to my bedroom. I set it on the nightstand. I looked around the room. The walls I had painted, the floor I had laid, the window that looked out on my growing lavender field. The email made me realize that my journey wasn't just about building the physical house. It was about building a strong, impenetrable emotional wall. My house was a fortress. The physical walls were wood and stone. The emotional walls were the knowledge of their betrayal. Their email was a test, a subtle way of testing the strength of my boundaries. If I had replied with even a simple, "I'm fine," they would have found a way to use it. They would have continued their slow, manipulative return. They would have tried to claim my success. I had passed the test. My silence was my power. My lack of reply was the loudest statement I could make. I was not available for their narrative anymore. This whole process, the drive-by, the email, it confirmed they were operating from a place of need, not love. They needed my organizing skills for the failing business. They needed my stability to feel better about their own crumbling lives. They needed me to be a failure so they could feel justified in their favoritism. Now that I was succeeding, they needed to claim me back to validate their narrative of being good parents who raised an independent daughter. It was all self-serving. It always had been. I got into bed. The sheets smelled like the clean scent of the laundry detergent I used. No heavy, stuffy scent of old house and tension. I felt safe. I thought about the house. I had built it with my own hands. No one could take that away. And no email, no matter how passive or manipulative, could undo the truth of the last 2 years. I fell asleep that night, not with the lingering bitterness of the email, but with the quiet, deep satisfaction of knowing I had protected myself. I had filed the truth away. I had stood my ground. The house was mine. The peace was mine. And the silence would continue. My lack of reply to the email was its own clear message. They had tried the gentle, manipulative approach. It didn't work. I had shut the door on their narrative rewrite. My mother, being who she is, couldn't tolerate that. She hates being ignored. My silence drove her crazy. She needed a confrontation. She needed to break my peace. So they came, unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was outside, mixing concrete for a small path I was laying near the back door. I heard the car pull up. It wasn't my father's usual slow cruise. This time they parked right by my stone gate. They were making a statement. We are here. We are stopping. I stood up slowly. I brushed the dust off my hands. I was wearing old paint-splattered clothes. I didn't rush. I didn't hide. I waited. There they were, my mother and father. My mother stepped out first. She was dressed like she was going to a Sunday luncheon. A fancy dress, heels, high heels. They were completely impractical for the gravel driveway. She wobbled slightly as she tried to walk. She looked out of place, like a tourist visiting a construction site. My father was different. He was stiff, silent. He wore his usual work pants, but they looked too clean. He didn't look at me right away. His gaze was fixed on the house. He was observing, taking inventory, just like his drive-by. But now he was closer. The reality of what I built was hitting him harder. My mother, however, fixed her eyes on me. She gave me a forced, tight little smile. "Isabella," she said. Her voice was too loud, too bright. It bounced off the house walls. We were just in the area and we thought, well, since you hadn't replied to the email, we'd just pop by. See this beautiful place Michael told us about? I stayed quiet. I walked toward them slowly, deliberately. I stopped a few feet away. I crossed my arms over my chest. The look I gave them was blank, neutral. It contained no invitation. "I'm laying concrete," I said. Simple, direct, a statement of my reality. A gentle reminder that they were interrupting my work. "Yes, well, we won't stay long," Mom chirped. She was clearly nervous. Her eyes darted from me to the house, trying to find a starting point for her conversation. "It is quite rustic. You did all this, really? It looks very professional." Rustic. She meant unfinished. Professional. She meant stolen or paid for by some secret benefactor. She couldn't admit I was capable. Dad finally spoke. His voice was low, rough. "You've got solar panels." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, a point of fact he couldn't reconcile. He ran a heavy machinery landscaping business. Solar panels were outside his world. My world was now separate from his. They scanned the beams of the porch, the glass entryway, the vast expanse of the lavender rose. They were trying to take control by dissecting my work. "That garden is quite large," my mother said, her voice dropping. "Are you sure you can manage all that yourself? It's a lot of work for one person, Isabella. You might need help." There it was. The opening. The subtle suggestion that I was failing, that I needed them. The idea that this success was too big for me to handle alone. A slow attempt to slip back into a position of authority or control. I finally broke my silence, but only to point. I didn't look at them. I pointed to the side wall of my house, the one that was currently basking in the late afternoon sun. "Look at that," I said. They turned, slowly, following my gaze. I had spent 2 weeks painting it. The mural was huge. It covered the entire side of the house that faced their approach. It depicted a young woman, not detailed but clearly working. She was small, bent over, her hands deep in the soil, planting seeds. She was focused, resolute. Behind her in the background were large, blurred figures, faceless hands. These hands were captured in the act of throwing sharp, dark stones. They were throwing them at the girl's back. The stones were frozen midair. They represented the insults, the dismissals, the cruelty, but the girl was ignoring them. She was focused on the ground, on her future, on the life she was creating. And above the scene, painted in strong, precise gold lettering, was my caption. My truth, my final word on their role in my life, watered by rejection, rooted in self. They saw it. My mother's wobbly heels stopped moving. My father stood rigid. They read the gold words. They looked at the faceless hands. Then they looked at the girl planting the seeds. They looked at the whole picture. The silence that followed was heavy, much heavier than the silence of the last 2 years. This was a silence filled with undeniable truth, a truth I had painted for them. My mother gasped. It was a sharp, involuntary sound. It wasn't a sound of apology or understanding. It was a sound of sheer wounded self-pity. How dare she call us cruel? That's what her gasp meant. My father's face didn't change. It stayed hard. But his eyes, those were the only tell. They moved quickly, nervously, between the girl, the stones, and the gold lettering. He was processing the exact accusation, the directness of it. It was aimed right at him, at both of them. I hadn't said a word of anger since they arrived. The mural spoke for me. It articulated the depth of my pain and the source of my resilience better than any verbal argument ever could. It was my story, painted on the walls of my own safe house. They stood there for maybe 3 full minutes, just staring. They didn't try to deny it. They didn't try to talk their way out of it. The visual was too strong. The words were too clear. Finally, my mother managed to speak. Her voice was weak, defeated. "Isabella, you think that we—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It is my house," I interrupted, cutting her off cleanly. "My paint, my story, I said it simply. I didn't raise my voice. I walked back to my bag of concrete. I picked up my trowel. I started mixing again. I turned my back on them. I dismissed them completely. The way they had dismissed me 2 years ago. We should go, my father mumbled. He hadn't asked to step inside. He hadn't asked about the business. The mural had completely destroyed their plan. My mother's heels clicked hurriedly on the gravel as they retreated. They were rushing now, rushing to escape the truth on my wall. They got into the dark sedan. The tires spun briefly on the loose gravel. They drove away quickly. I watched the dust settle again. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I kept mixing the concrete. It felt like the most powerful moment of my life. I hadn't lost my temper. I hadn't pleaded. I hadn't even argued. I had simply shown them the evidence. The physical evidence of my strength and the artistic evidence of their cruelty. They left without stepping inside. They had seen enough. They had seen that I wasn't just surviving. I was interpreting their actions and using them as fertilizer for my own growth. The mural was a monument. Not of revenge, but of truth. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of finished business. The confrontation was over. The boundary was set, and it was painted in gold. After the mural confrontation, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It was a respectful distance maintained not by me, but by their retreat. They had seen the truth painted on my wall. They knew I was not playing their game anymore. I was not coming back. I focused on my life, finishing the last details of the house, planning my lavender harvest. The shame I felt for them quickly faded, replaced by my daily routine and my deep, quiet satisfaction. I was rooted. They were drifting. Then, weeks later, the final piece of their world fell apart. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't a call. It was a message. A text message. It was from Michael. I hesitated before opening it. I didn't want the drama. I didn't want his voice in my head. But my curiosity, the old, inherited instinct to know what was happening in the family center, won out. I tapped the message. It was just a photo, a cold, stark image. It was the yard of the family business. The one my grandfather started. The one my father ran. The one Michael inherited. It was a complete mess. The parking lot was empty. The office windows were boarded up with cheap plywood. The wooden planks looked like bandages over a fatal wound. A sign for a commercial realtor was hammered into the dry, cracked earth near the road. The sign was tilting, sad and forlorn. The words were clear. For lease. The whole place looked dead, abandoned. Below the photo was his. Text. Short, bitter, full of self-pity and misplaced. Blame. Hope your little garden's worth more than our legacy. I stared at the screen. My hands weren't shaking this time. I felt a slow, heavy wave of finality wash over me. The emotional wound was numb, but the sheer fact of it was stunning. Legacy. That word was the sharpest part. That was the word they used to justify everything. The business was the legacy. The company was the reason Michael got the keys. The reason I was called a failure. The reason they cast me out. The legacy that belonged to the male heir. And now it was gone. It wasn't just failure. It was collapse. Total, undeniable public collapse. I looked at the image again. The boarded-up windows. The for lease sign. The business had not just failed. It had folded. Michael hadn't been able to run it for even 2 full years. All the privilege, all the investment, all the unwavering faith my parents had poured into him, it all led to a dusty lot and plywood. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. First, a cold satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes when a painful, unjust equation finally balances itself. They chose wrong. They bet everything on the wrong child. Their belief system was proven false. I wasn't the failure. The legacy was, second, a profound sadness. Not for Michael, but for my grandfather. He had built that company from the ground up, with hard, honest work. It was his pride, his original dream. My parents had let Michael destroy something that was meant to span generations, and they destroyed it because they wouldn't listen to me, the daughter who actually knew the accounts and the logistics. Third, a deep validation. This confirmed everything I suspected about Michael. He was entitled. He was spoiled. He lacked the discipline and the humility needed for hard, sustained work. He wanted the title, the keys, and the prestige, but not the effort. I had been willing to put in the effort, but they never trusted me with the keys. His text message was the lowest form of bitterness. He was lashing out. He wasn't confessing sadness or remorse. He was blaming me. Hope your little garden's worth more. He was trying to minimize my success by comparing it to their giant, burning failure. He was suggesting that my quiet triumph was somehow responsible for their loss. I didn't reply to him. I closed the messaging app. There was nothing I could say. My success wasn't his problem. His failure wasn't my burden. I took a screenshot of the photo. I zoomed in on the tilting for lease sign. I saved the image. I walked over to the front door of my house. I got my roll of painter's tape. I carefully taped the photo to the inside of the door, right at eye level, so I would see it every time I left my home, every time I stepped out into the life I built. This wasn't about gloating. This was about a final, necessary emotional break. It was a tangible reminder. I stood there, looking at the image of their ruined legacy, taped to the inside of the door of my thriving, self-built home. I spoke out loud, to the empty room. Not all inheritances are blessings. Michael inherited the business. It was a crushing burden of expectation and entitlement that he couldn't handle. It brought him down. It brought my parents down. I inherited rejection. That was my true inheritance. It was a gift of pain that forced me to be strong. It forced me to save, to build, to rely only on myself. My inheritance was my resilience, and it made me rich in ways money couldn't buy. The photo on my door became a constant, silent teacher, a confirmation that leaving was the right choice. Staying in that toxic environment, trying to save a legacy that wasn't meant for me, would have destroyed me too. I would have been collateral damage in Michael's collapse. My parents' devotion to the idea of the family business, to the idea of the male heir, had cost them everything. Their money, their legacy, and their relationship with me. They sacrificed their daughter for a business that couldn't survive. I realized then that they were already gone, not just from my life, but from their own. They were ghosts haunting the ruins of a failed dream. Their life was defined by loss. My life was defined by creation. My house was clean. It was orderly. My garden was thriving. I was preparing for my first harvest. I had built a space where things stayed alive. Michael had squandered the life given to him. The collapse of the business was the final, brutal proof that my judgment had been sound. My decision to walk away was the only way to save myself. I didn't need their keys. I needed my shovel. I left the photo on the door. It was a piece of history, a fixed point, a reminder of the difference between an inherited burden and an earned blessing. I turned away from the door and walked into my lavender field. The scent was potent, powerful, alive. That was my inheritance now. Life, growth, resilience. Months passed after the photo of the boarded-up business arrived. My life was peaceful. The drama was settling. I was focused on my work. My lavender was ready for its first big harvest. I was running small weekend workshops, teaching people how to dry the buds and make oil. I was busy, fulfilled, and financially stable. The silence from my family felt complete now. Not the angry silence of neglect, but the accepting silence of distance. They were dealing with their own collapse. I was busy with my own bloom. Then, the mail arrived. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I walked down my driveway to the mailbox I had installed near the road. There were bills. And one envelope. It wasn't a bill. It was a standard white envelope, hand-addressed. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, not the strong, confident script my father used to use for business checks. This looked fragile, uncertain. I knew immediately it was from him. Dad. I carried the letter back up to the house. I sat down on my porch swing. The sunlight was warm. The scent of lavender was strong. I held the envelope for a long time. It felt heavy, heavier than any of my tools. This was real, physical, not a hurried, digital message. I opened it slowly, carefully. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. His handwriting was messy. It looked like he had struggled to write it. The letter was short, maybe 5 sentences. Isabella, I drove past again, a few weeks ago. I saw everything. The house, the lavender, the mural. You did more with that small piece of land than I ever did with the business. You built something real, something beautiful, something that will last. We got it wrong. Everything. We got it wrong about you, about Michael, about the business. I hope you're happy, truly happy. You deserve it. Dad, I read it once. My eyes scanning the lines quickly. I read it a second time, letting the meaning sink in. My chest felt tight, but not from sadness. From shock. It was so direct, so simple. There was no manipulation, no passive aggression, no attempt to bring me back. No, we miss you, or can you help Michael? It was just an admission of failure. The core of the letter was that single shocking sentence. We got it wrong. He was taking responsibility. Not just blaming Mom, not just blaming Michael. He was including himself. My father, the silent partner in my emotional abandonment, was admitting his error. And the comparison, you did more with that small piece of land than I ever did with the business. That was a massive admission. The business was his entire identity. It was his whole life. To admit that my small, self-built home and garden were worth more, were more real, than his lifelong legacy. That was the cost of his pride. He had lost his legacy to Michael's incompetence, and now he was admitting that my path was the superior one. It was validation. Total, complete, undeniable validation. Everything I had been fighting for, everything I had been building to prove, was summed up in that small, shaky letter. I wasn't the failure. They had judged me incorrectly. I put the letter down on the wooden bench beside me. I looked out at the rows of lavender. They seemed greener, stronger. This letter was what I had needed 2 years ago. This letter would have changed everything. It would have saved me so much pain, so much lonely struggle. But it came now, after the collapse, after I had already built my life without them. The words were beautiful in their honesty, but they were also devastating in their timing. They were too late. I didn't feel a rush of forgiveness. Forgiveness is something you offer when it still hurts, when it still costs you something. I was beyond that. I was already healed. The apology didn't mend the wounds. It simply confirmed the scarring. My pain was no longer a fresh wound. It was history. His words couldn't change that history. They couldn't erase the cold command to get out. I closed my eyes and pictured him writing it, alone, seeing the ruins of the business, seeing my mural, realizing the full scope of his loss. He wasn't just admitting he was wrong about the business. He was admitting he was wrong about his daughter. That hurt him deeply. Not because I was hurting, but because his judgment, the foundation of his paternal authority, was flawed. This letter wasn't for me, really. It was for him. It was his desperate attempt to clear his conscience. His final act of honesty before whatever came next for him. I thought about calling him. Just a simple, "I got your letter." But what good would it do? It would open the door to a difficult, painful conversation about the past. A conversation that would serve his emotional needs, not mine. I had worked too hard for this peace. I would not sacrifice it for his closure. I stood up. I took the letter inside. I didn't frame it. I didn't display it. That would give it too much power over my present. I walked to my small office. I opened my fireproof safe where I kept my important documents. The deed to the land. My business registration papers. I took the letter. I folded it neatly. I placed it inside a clear protective sleeve. I filed it with the deed to my land. It was not filed under forgiveness. It was not filed under reconciliation. It was filed under proof that my perception was right. Proof that I was not the burden. Proof that I was not the failure. Proof that my journey into the wilderness was justified. It was the final piece of evidence I needed, the quiet, written admission from the one person who had been silent while my mother pushed me out. It was validation that the pain had been real, that the sacrifice had been necessary. This letter was the official final chapter of their story in my life. I had the book. I had the ending. And I was done reading it. I closed the safe. I left the office. I didn't feel happy or sad. I felt complete. His words hadn't given me closure. They simply acknowledged the closure I had already built for myself. The letter was a landmark, not a destination. It marked the point where they finally saw my worth. But by then, I had already known it for 2 years. And that knowledge, that self-worth, was worth more than 1,000 letters. It was worth more than the family business. It was worth more than their entire legacy. My true happiness wasn't dependent on their acknowledgement, but his words allowed me to finally seal the past. The circle was complete. I was free. If you've ever been cast aside but rose anyway, if you used rejection as your fuel, share your story in the comments. We are stronger than the silence they gave us. Hit like if you believe rejection can grow the strongest roots, and subscribe for more stories where silence blooms louder than revenge.